Shop, episode 221, Building Your People Program with HR consultant Dana Goodwin. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Right off the bat, I just want to remind you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Just hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. And also share these episodes with a friend. That really helps the show get traction out there in the land of podcasts, and helps the ideas and insights in these episodes really get out there too and do more good. So share the love that way. That'd be really awesome to share these episodes with people who you think could really use it. So I also want to remind everyone that Keys to the Shop's Mighty Network community is growing, and I would love for you to be a part of it. There's a group of people who are together wanting to become better at coffee retail professionals looking to help each other grow, ask questions, find solutions together, things like that. It's a community of people just like you. So if you want to join us over on the Mighty Network platform in the Keys to the Shop community, just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. I'll send you an invitation, or you can just click on the link provided in the show notes to request to join, and you will be added to the group. So I hope to see you there. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is an amazing specialty coffee equipment supplier operating out of my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. I've known these guys since the beginning of their company, and they are completely dedicated to helping equip you for success in specialty coffee, whether that's for home or commercial environments. And if you're in the market for adding a few more machines to your lineup, upgrading what you have, if you're opening a new location, or in the market to just open your first store, Prima is a great partner to work with when it comes to commercial coffee equipment, and not only specialty coffee equipment like espresso machines, grinders, and brewers, but also things like under-counter refrigeration. So it runs the spectrum of what you'll need, and they work closely with you to make sure you're getting exactly what you need for your situation. So go to the website, prima-coffee.com. Check them out over there. You're going to find such a great selection and amazing resources in the form of videos and articles to help you use the equipment well and make coffee well too. So can't recommend Prima Coffee enough. Go visit them again, prima-coffee.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. This is the line of plant-based performance beverages that are designed for baristas, and before they even hit your shelves and are used by your staff, they are tested by some of the best baristas around the world, because Pacific is dedicated to making sure that they are serving the barista community and the coffee community well. These products are just a testimony to that fact. So no matter what you use, if you're using the almond, soy, coconut, rice, hemp, oat, you will be getting a product that truly performs on bar, stands up to the heat from steaming. It produces amazing latte art ready texture, and it keeps the flavor balance focused on the coffee. All these things make it a perfect choice for your menu. Your customers are going to love it. And I think you just need to go to the website, pacificfoods.com. You could just follow the link in the show notes and get this in your store and try it for yourself. Truly, I think the best way to elevate your plant-based offerings in your cafe is to offer your customers the Barista Series from Pacific. All right, well, today we're going to dive into a bit of the human resources world, which is kind of a weird word. When you talk to HR professionals, Dana's no exception here, our guest today. It's just an impersonal word. It really it belies the importance of people in our organization. They're not just resources. These are relationships. As professional as they may be, we want to be people-first leaders, people-first organizations, and I think today's episode is going to help equip us with some insights and foundational knowledge to launch us into the right direction when we're setting up our companies to serve our people well. Dana is an HR consultant working with clients in specialty coffee, food service, and in retail. Now, what she does when she partners with leaders is she works to create intentional people programs and help find solutions to HR challenges, of which you don't need me to tell you, there are many. Her specialties include workplace culture, recruiting operations, and retention strategy. And Dana has been working in retail and hospitality for over 20 years. She holds a master's degree from the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Colorno, Italy, and has led teams in recruiting in HR operations at Eataly, Dickson's Farmstand, and Blue Bottle Coffee. And today, like I said, we're diving into some real foundational knowledge about what it takes to have a great people program and strategy going forward as we are rebuilding our businesses from COVID. And we're wanting to build our spaces to be a place where people are put first. So I hope that you're ready to gain some insights for your HR program, for your people programs. Dana just does a fantastic job setting us up for success in these things. So without further ado, here now is my conversation about building your people program with Dana Goodwin. Well, Dana, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Excited to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. Understanding that's kind of the question carries different meaning now in this time of crisis. Generally speaking, though, today I'm doing pretty well. Thank you.
Yes, same. And I am excited to talk about human resources because this, if no other time in the history of this show, has there been a more appropriate time to talk about the way we care for those that we are charged with leading. And you've done amazing work in this field, and we need some insights, and we need to talk about this because a lot of people's emotions are on, high alert, and the situation is not the best. And so we want to try to do what we can as leaders to create as much opportunity for success as possible. So I wonder if we could just start talking a little bit about when your career focuses on human resources. Why is this important to you? Why does this become something that you're just dedicated to, and what role does it play for you in your perspective? What role does this play in creating a solid and sustainable business?
Yeah, so I think we're just kind of, as a society, pushing out of this idea that HR is like this kind of stuffy, antiquated role of the finger wagger telling us what we cannot do in order to protect the company from liability, and really realizing that HR supports, like a healthy HR function supports what are without a doubt some of the most important and profit driving functions of a business. So whether that's hiring and onboarding, designing benefits programs and employee retention initiatives, basic business stuff like payroll, they're all so important. But really what makes HR really important to me is that very human side of the function. So, really connecting with people, developing people, understanding why they want to be at work every day and how they can contribute ultimately to the success of the business.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And from the perspective of, a lot of people who are used to a corporate version of human resources will recognize the finger wagging and the red tape and all of that stuff. But then a lot of coffee shops just don't have anything with like human resources departments or heads or focus necessarily, at least from my experience. And I know you've got experience in the coffee field with human resources and have a perspective on that. And so I'm curious about from where you sit, how do we fare in HR when it comes to specialty coffee shops? I mean, what are we good at and what are we really lacking from what you've seen?
Yeah, well, it's a really great question. And I'd say that I want to frame this by saying, right now is a great opportunity to be asking this question, because it's like such a prime moment for deep reflection and making really big change. Because I think, on no matter what scale we're looking at, whether we're a single unit, privately owned coffee shop or a large multinational publicly owned chain of coffee shops, the HR function is so important. And whether you have a team of, 100 people dedicated to it, or if that is just one of the many hats you wear as an owner operator, being intentional with HR is really important. And I have to say, in the coffee industry, there's some things we do really well, and there's some things where I think we have a lot of opportunity. So some of the things I think, just very generally speaking, that a lot of specialty coffee businesses seem to be doing well is putting intention behind inclusion and being open-minded, building teams with strong camaraderie. I see that a lot. People attracted to this industry often like to connect with others. They like to be working on a team, and they're really passionate about the product. And so I think as a business, that function of HR, it just kind of comes sort of naturally to a lot of the leaders in this industry. And there's also a very heavy focus on technical training, right? Like dialing in and mastering your foam texture, that kind of thing. We're really good at teaching people about how to do that. Some of the opportunities, and this is cross food, restaurant, service industry, I'd say, not just specialty coffee, is that we tend to be very reactive in the way we operate. And I think part of that is because, it's high stress. We are used to kind of turning and burning and working really hard. And there's this perception that sometimes we just don't have time to invest in being a little more proactive and plan the way we should. So we often make very quick decisions about hiring that don't always serve the business well. We don't do a lot of deep thinking about our employer identity. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more, like questions around value and mission and culture. There's not a lot of I don't see a lot of examples of intention with that. And then leadership training. I think we're pretty good at teaching people how to be operational style managers, like how to open and close the shop, how to get things clean, how to get orders in on time. But there's a lot of opportunity for us to do more with teaching and developing people and how to be strong people leaders.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you phrase it like being reactive. That really rings true for me, that we are always kind of putting out fires and moving on from one thing to the next. And there's always something to draw our attention away from what we're working on in the moment. And so it's hard to see things kind of grow and be nurtured and come to maturity, let alone have some kind of intentional, and purposeful push toward a shared goal. And that's pretty rare. So a lot of people, especially now, are just keeping their heads above water with a lot of the stuff that's going on. And that wasn't that different HR-wise before. It's just even more intense now, it seems. But as you also alluded to, this is a great time to talk about these opportunities for improving how we approach human resources. And do you, as a HR professional, do you see this as a time for us to kind of remake the way that we are as a business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the really sobering reality is that, a lot of businesses are not going to make it through this crisis. And that's really heartbreaking when I think about, the amount, even if we were to have a very kind of objective lens and say, well, this person wasn't a great leader or didn't do a very good job running their shop anyways. So like even that person has poured so much blood, sweat, tears, and heart into their operation. And then there's going to be some people who are just prime examples, who are living all of these things that you and I are talking about. And, just like the walking examples of high function that may not make it as well, because there is just, if there's one thing we can all agree on or say is certain, is just there is an incredible level of uncertainty right now. That being said, I think that to push through this crisis, just kind of with our heads down and not thinking about, well, why are our margins so thin? Why do we have such high rates of turnover? Why do I not trust my employees? All of these questions like that may come up for some, or that may be laying kind of under the surface for people. I think it would be a really big missed opportunity to not let those questions come to the surface and really deal with them in a deep and meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, agreed. So now today, that's kind of our aim. And you've come up with 3 areas that are just it seems at the root of being able to fix some of these things, and what a good HR approach would be for coffee shops. And that's the number 1 was transparency and communication, and then intentional planning, and finally leadership. And so let's dive into these because we need it more than ever. So transparency and communication is the first one. What do we need to know about being transparent and having good communication? Because on the surface, we want to be open and we want to communicate a lot. Great. But obviously there's more to it than just that.
Yeah, I think that, you had an earlier guest who talked about just the levels of anxiety that people across the board are feeling right now. And certainly in our industry and, people who are starting to reopen their shops and bring their employees back to work are no exception. If not, we can probably assume that there's maybe even more heightened anxiety among some of our teams. So, transparency, I think, it's a word that we throw around a lot, and it's like, well, what exactly does that mean? And I think it's really, about being as open and connected to your team as you can be. And that may mean stretching your comfort level as a leader. And, it's not like not like you have to have your team privy to every thought and possible idea you have spinning in your head as a business owner and leader. But, when you make decisions or when you're uncertain about a decision that you need to make, telling people about that, treating your team like peers, like adults, like true collaborators, will set the tone for a much healthier relationship. It will help you build trust and help, really support a sense of safety and care that you have for your team, strengthen camaraderie, all of those things that will really help everyone work towards a shared goal.
Yeah. So in the pursuit of being transparent, which requires communication, how do we practically go about making communication a two-way street and making it so that we're building into our cultures this place where people feel like they can share their fears and anxieties, and we can also be open and honest with them, yet still be leaders?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I like the question because it's like, okay, great, transparency, really good idea, but how do we actually do it? Like, how do we make that coffee and hand it to someone? Like, let's get a real something really tangible here, digestible. And, to be honest, though, it will really be up to the leader and to decide how they do that and what works best for their team. And a lot of that will depend on, where they are in the opening process or the reopening process. Also, how many locations they have, what kind of team they're working with in terms of, do they have an internal comms person or not? Or, again, it's one owner operator kind of wearing all of those hats. I think that, using technology is a great start, but you can't solely rely on it. I've had plenty of clients tell me that, well, we wrote it down, we sent the email, and nobody listened, nobody did it, whatever that it is, whether it's a new policy and procedure or, showing up for a team building fun thing. It's like people off, we're so flooded with information right now. I'm sure everyone listening gets, some odd dozen plus COVID-19 style emails in their inbox every day from, anywhere from a retailer they shopped at 3 years ago to their bank. It's just, there's so much right now. But, as employer, find the right cadence for your team. So, I've heard of success stories of, people getting a once a week email from their leaders, even if there's no updates, just like, hey, checking in, just to continue that engagement. Mm-hmm. But again, following up on that written communication. So if you're ready to open and this action item is to communicate the steps for that, then I would recommend having, sending out the email and having some kind of follow up to that, whether it's a Zoom meeting or if you're ready to, again, open, then bring the team in for a couple of prep shifts ahead of time and really go over whatever it is you're trying to communicate and be really open to collaboration and questions. Listen to people. What are they afraid of? What are they worried about? Make sure to ask those questions.
It seems as though regularity of the communication is really critical so that it develops an expectation that people can rely on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that consistency, regular connection, and again, it really depends. Are you a shop that's been closed for 60 days now and you're ready to bring your team back on? Or are you a shop that's been, managed to stay open with just curbside service through this time? Your communication needs will vary quite a bit, but absolutely consistency and follow-up, I'd say, are the two most important takeaways. And ask questions, really engage. Did that make sense? Do you need more information? Do you have any concerns? That will create a sense of accountability to your team that they need to know that information and really, really listen. And then just as a little side note, and to be a very responsible HR person, that may mean you have to pay your team for some of that time. You can't, for hourly employees, you can't just, be on a 2-hour Zoom call and expect them to use that time pro bono for their business. They are still your employee, and you need to compensate them for that time.
Thank you for saying that. That actually is a tension that a lot of people have right now, because the people that are still working at shops that are really trying to stay above water are holding in their minds a tension of, I want to do what I can for this business because it means a lot to me. And, coffee shops especially are a very relational place, and you feel a sense of loyalty to it, and sometimes that can get, well, for lack of a better word, sometimes it can get toxic. Whether from the leadership down or within yourself, if you don't see your needs being met as an employee. And that comes down to compensation a lot of times for your time, where a lot of extra is expected of you, but not a lot of communication is happening. So that's really critical. And I imagine that a lot of people might be experiencing that right now, but it also kind of leads into this question that I have that's actually from one of our Keys to the Shop community members. And it's around something that I imagine owners are feeling a lot right now. And that's that urgency that they want to communicate to the people that they do have with them. Like, how do you as an owner communicate to your staff the supreme urgency to bring, like, everyone needs to bring their A game? How do you communicate that while also being empathetic to them? So, yeah, urgency along with empathy. Are they at odds? Like, you've got a lot riding on this as the owner, but your staff aren't owners. They're employees. Like, what's the balance here? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and it brings up a lot of things for me. The first thing I'd start with is this idea of bringing your A game. The A game can mean something different to each person. So if you have a very cohesive team and you've already like knocked out like your values and your mission and you feel like your team is just like, you guys are all working towards the same common goal, great. If there is some kind of question around that, then the first thing I would say is to really make sure as the leader, you have a clear vision of what A game means to you. Is that you need to work really fast? Is it you need to be extremely safe? You need to be extremely kind? Like, what does that mean for you and your team, the A game? So being really clear on that. I think once you have clarity around that, then you can, just reiterate that message with your team and have trust in them to do that. And then, follow up and hold people accountable as appropriate, while also holding a lot of space for everybody's different reality. We have sort of this shared experience, but then every person is processing it in a different way, maybe has family members who are impacted in different ways by this crisis. I mean, there's just so many possibilities of how this crisis can be impacting someone's ability to, quote, bring their A game. So yeah, I'd say first be really clear on what that means, communicate it to your team, and then hold a lot of space to listen and validate concerns and just be really open and vulnerable with your team and allow them to be the same with you.
I like that you brought clarity into it, because we can often say, well, I'm really open and I communicate all the time, but that doesn't mean that it's quality. It doesn't mean that people necessarily understand what you mean when you say what you say. That's why a lot of people ask what you heard me say, and then they hear it repeated back to them so that there's clarity about what our next steps are. And it seems like inherent in the question, and this is not, I'm not saying that this person is saying this necessarily, but I've definitely heard this from owners in the past where they want people to care as much as they do. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I feel like that's kind of unfair and maybe impossible.
Well, I think that, so that's such a good point, and I could talk about this for a long time, but what I'd say is that, as a leader, okay, especially as an owner operator, you're right. Like, no one is ever going to have the same skin in the game as you. Like, some people have, their home on the line for their business. Some people have, just a lot of personal assets or friends' assets tied up in their business. So of course, like, you cannot expect, like, a team member that you're paying at an hourly rate for 20 to 40 hours a week to have the same skin in the game. However, when you're very thoughtful about your hiring practice, you can really look for value alignment with your team. So if something like urgency, like meaning like working really fast because you're an extremely busy, high volume cafe, or you're the kind of cafe that's slow and then you get slammed for 2 hours a day and you need people who can just turn it on. You've got to know how to hire for that, because like that urgency may be something that you can't teach everyone. So, I'm talking about a very kind of specific kind of urgency, and this, the person asking this question may be thinking of urgency in different ways, but this is applicable really to any kind of priority or value. There's some things you can teach and train, and there's some things you really need to look for in like the fabric of an individual as they're joining your team. I can tell you, like, kind of on a different note, that working alongside an owner operator who is really stressed in trying to message the team that they need to hurry up by just being stressed and working faster is not very effective. But being more direct and talking about specific ways in which a team member can act or, work faster or smarter, will go a lot further than just like trying to use urgency kind of as a contagious thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like this urgency or this and the importance of the moment, it shouldn't necessarily equal approaching these things without intention, without looking at it from the perspective of the other, back to the empathy, back to being open and honest, but also being clear and setting people up for success when, you give them a directive that there's the stuff there to do it, and everybody knows what that means when we say urgency and et cetera. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it kind of leads us into our next point here, which is about intentional planning, intentionality sort of being the theme of the moment here. Tell us a little bit about what we need to be doing in terms of planning and with our human resources.
Yeah, so I think that there are a lot of, we can approach this kind of on looking at it on a micro level, kind of day to day, and then also that very macro kind of long running level of like, how do you want your business to look and feel when we look back on this time? So on the more micro level, it's like, you need to plan safe openings by following local, state, federal guidelines and, making good decisions based on best practices that you're seeing out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of conflicting information out there. We're seeing a lot of, we're getting a message to do A one day and then an opposite message the next day. Thankfully, there is an incredible amount of open source sharing right now. A lot of people just sharing what's working for them. So you can look to other members in your community and even industries outside of specialty coffee to get ideas on, how to plan for this hopefully finite period of time.
Yes.
And one thing I'd say is that, it's really important this is a little bit of a side note again, but it's really important to be documenting and just like keeping track of the changes you're making and the plans that you're making, not getting stuck to them, because again, like things are changing almost on a daily, if not even sometimes hourly basis of how we're operating our businesses right now. But make sure you're keeping track of those changes, and it doesn't have to be some kind of formal HR software system. Like you can just keep a running Google Doc of kind of like a journal style of what you're doing. and also, keep writing down how you're rehiring people, how you're bringing them back on board, any adjustments you're making to payroll, just to kind of dot your I's and cross your T's, because I promise you in 3 months from now, if you get any kind of unemployment inquiries or questions about really anything kind of on that more technical business side of HR, you are not going to remember what you were doing at this time because you're so busy just getting your doors open. So just try to keep a journal style document about that if you're a small business, and if you're a larger business, you likely have systems in place already for that. And then, what I want to say about like the other side of planning, that more big picture planning, it's really important, as I mentioned earlier, for companies to really intentionally identify their values and their mission, and really put some thought to the culture that they're creating. I've noticed that a lot of small businesses, ironically, will spend like so much time on menu planning or business plans or build out of a new space, and definitely in their hearts and minds, they probably know what their values are and what their mission is, because these are typically like highly passionate people who are investing a lot of themselves into this business. But I find a lot of resistance and just kind of resistance, I guess, to really defining those things, the value, mission, and culture. But once you define them, they become like these unbelievable tools that you can leverage in so many ways, like whether it's for hiring or for explaining to your team why you decided to move from this pastry to that pastry or this roast to that roast. Like, if you've got this shared language and these shared set of beliefs and a mission that everyone's agreed upon, you can really use that as your North Star during these uncertain times. And I really believe, even though people are so busy, that there is no better time than now to really examine those things and get clear around those things. And I think that we're in an interesting time for humanity right now, where I think we're all feeling a little more, or not all, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but a lot of people I'm speaking to feel a little softer, a little more open, a little more vulnerable. And I think, your team might be really into this and find it very meaningful and helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because we're, for lack of, I don't want to be too dramatic, but there's an existential crisis, professionally speaking. A lot of people are exiting the career or considering how they're going to continue. And if they do continue, then they want it to be a little bit more along the lines of what they had in mind when they first started. So they might, as much as it sucks to have it be a forced situation where you're becoming really lean and have to consider what the future holds in such a dramatic way, you can use that time to identify what your absolute core values are and build it a little bit more, like you say, intentionally. You're intentionally planning on who you want to be, how you want people to, create that reality in the shop going forward. And when we're doing this intentional planning and we're bringing people back on, I imagine I don't know if this is an aside or anything, but I think there might be a lot of shops out there who are saying, you know what, it's about time that we changed, and we're going to use this opportunity to change. And not everybody is going to be on board with that, who you rehire right now, because you haven't rolled it out, because you're just doing curbside, right? So how do we, as we do these intentional things, generating buy-in and maybe accepting the idea that certain people are just not going to be on board with the new way that you want to do business. When you're looking at it from a HR perspective, how do we approach creating that future of our shop, maybe a version 2, so to speak, but also knowing that not everybody is going to be on board.
Yeah, I think as like a people person and just like kind of someone who has recognized that I'm like a pleaser, I like everyone to like me and not be mad at me. That's a very challenging part of the work I do, which is sometimes saying goodbye to people and recognizing that, hey, like, it seems like you have these values that are really important to you. The company has these values. They're just not lining up. And finding really dignified ways to say goodbye instead of just letting things fester and become toxic. And kind of, I hear managers say things, so it's so hard to listen to, but people saying like, oh, we're just going to let this work itself out. Like, we're going to kind of like let this person realize they don't belong here until they quit or leave. And oh my gosh, I mean, I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast and you yourself have had experiences of working with that, quote, like bad apple, but it's not that that person is bad. It's just that this isn't a good fit for them. And like pushing them to the point where they, to just kind of continue on this analogy of the bad apples until they rot or break down. It's like not good to watch. Like, you've got to really, you got to get them out of there. And I have, in my time working like in-house HR and also just advising clients, there is always a dignified way to say goodbye to somebody. And that's really just a human, approach. And being honest and kind of going back to that message earlier of transparent and communicative. You don't have to tell them everything, but usually if you're ready for them to go, they're ready to go too. Or if you're going in this direction and they're resistant to it, it's time to say goodbye. Oftentimes. There are the occasions where you can like really, change people's minds or get them on board. Like, hey, we're going to totally change up our coffee program. I know you weren't interested in that a few months ago when we talked about it, but here's what I'm thinking. And, you never know, people change. And like, sometimes people are more open than we give them credit for. It's also like this idea of, and I'm sure so many, people in specialty coffee just know this so well. It's like, if you try to please everyone, you won't really please anyone. And that's something we think more about with our guests, and our offerings, right? We're not like offering every kind of option for coffee out there because we do this. Our specialty is, whatever, pour overs and espresso, or we actually don't do espresso, or and just being able to know that, to have that identity and be really clear about it and confident about it. And then, really work with those people who are on board and, and be willing to, I'm kind of crossing over between guests and team right now, but it's like, I really see them as in some ways, not interchangeable, but like, you can talk about them with the same lens of service and, and collaboration in a way. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so just recognizing that sometimes things work and sometimes they don't, but being really proactive and again, intentional with what it is you're doing and who it is you're doing it with, is much better than just kind of seeing where the chips fall.
Right. That, really is the working itself out part is such a pervasive thing in smaller businesses because a lot of people who start a coffee shop don't have much leadership experience or sometimes any, hospitality experience, and they just start the shop. But when you're faced with those issues of having to have a face-to-face with somebody, it's much easier to let that thing work itself out, or at least like hope against hope. And usually that just creates toxicity. And it's a fear-based approach, and it doesn't yield the kind of thing that we think it will. Speaking from personal experience, because I've done this right and I've done it wrong myself, and like you say, you can vouch for that. Yeah, going, being vulnerable with them and transparent and honest, and you'll be surprised to be like, yeah, okay, cool. It's almost like people were expecting you to talk to them, but then giving people the opportunity to say, like, this is new, but let's give everyone the opportunity to rise to the occasion as well. Are there things that we need to be aware of when we're changing the rules of how we do things, legally speaking, as owners and operators, where we want to give ourselves as much opportunity to go back in time and say, hey, this was the change of direction, and I don't know, in the past, like, I've had people sign the back of barista manuals that had certain changes in them, or no phones on the bar policies and things like that. Are there any things that you would say are just good practice to do for covering yourself in the event that somebody says, hey, this is not what I signed up for, and by the way, I think this is actually wrong, and I'm going to, God forbid, like, take you to court or something like that?
Yeah. Well, really good question. And that's definitely something I focus on a lot with clients, is the importance of documenting. It's like, I feel like I kind of put on that finger wagger hat when I start talking about it, but it's not just about the, like, cover your, what approach. It's really like, when you think about it as reinforcing communication and leveraging documentation as a communication tool, I think that's a really good way to approach it. And also more internally, because it's not always you're not always sharing a document with an employee, but you may be documenting concerns around performance or behavior that you're concerned about. Again, you can just have that in, a private, like a well-secured file that you keep, even kind of journal style. If you're a small business and you don't have, the software, like expensive software that larger businesses have, you're just keeping track of things. So God forbid, you have, you're taken to court or something like that, or there's a complaint lodged against you, you are able to call up very specific dates, conversations. I'm not saying every conversation you have with every employee needs to be documented, but as a leader, when there's something a little off, or when something is headed in a direction where red flags are being raised. That's when you really start documenting. And of course, if there's ever performance feedback, and I believe positive and corrective, that should be documented too. Because the positive stuff is so cool to be able to look back on at somebody's 1-year review and say, hey, Chris, I'm just looking at these notes, and I remember on your 3rd month, that amazing thing you did for that customer, and I had forgotten about it, and oh my gosh, that was so great. And I've been seeing you do that, over time, and I appreciate it. Being able to really call up those specifics, both for positive reasons and also for, reasons to protect the business. So that's one thing. And then of course, every small business and of course larger business should have legal counsel of some kind. It doesn't have to be a huge expense, but you should have somebody that you can call to help you navigate some of those things. And one other very important point that I'd like to make is the importance of what can sometimes be well-intentioned decisions by leaders to take care of an employee could be actually considered discriminatory practices. So I'll give you an example of, if you have a team member who you know to be immunocompromised, but they have not expressed to you that they would like to be, would like to continue some kind of either leave of absence or to be furloughed or whatever it is that you have done with your team, if they haven't come to you to talk to you about their condition and you haven't worked out some kind of arrangement with them, you do not want to just take the step to terminate them or, give them special or different treatment from the rest of the team because they're protected, by the ADA, and there's some really great information on the EEOC website about how employers can navigate COVID-19 specifically, and what you need to consider for legal business practices when it comes to taking care of your employees. So just something to keep in mind. Don't make assumptions or treat team members differently based on their, age or current health. That needs to be a dynamic, collaborative process with the employee.
Yeah, wow, agreed. And it's easy to kind of fall into those things when everyone's, like wide-eyed. There's a lot of urgency, and sometimes in these moments, there's not a lot of reasoning. There's a lot of reaction, and that's what we kind of started talking about. Is that we're really good at creating things out of a reactive mode. And this is such a touchy time too, because all this stuff applies no matter what's happening in the world, but when it comes to planning, and my last kind of question in this section here is that, how far out should we be planning? Because things are changing so often. Different states have different times when you can open. We choose to open when we want, according to that. And as we apply what you've been talking about, certainly our teams are going to be better communicated with. But how far out should we be planning our future openings, and what kind of things should we be communicating about those plans to our employees?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question. And I wish that I just had some kind of really distinct kind of, boxed answer for you, like 1 year. But the truth is every situation, every business is in a slightly different situation based on where they're located, whether or not they've received a PPP loan or other kinds of loans or financial support. I'd say that it would be prudent to have, the next 30 days planned out, considering all, what and what you have, or at the very least, the next 2 weeks really ironed out so your staff knows what to expect. I recognize that some businesses, who have received PPP loans may get to the end of their 8-week period of having that money and still not be able to open fully for business and bring in the kind of revenue they need to really support operations and payroll. So, planning to those points is absolutely crucial, like being very intentional about, okay, how are we using this time that we have this financial runway? How are we using this money so we are able to have the majority of the loan forgiven, is absolutely imperative. And then beyond that, I think it really depends on the business. Do you have investors? Do you have some cushion for finances, or do you not? Like, you need to really, take a look at that and figure out what are you going to do in a couple of weeks if your municipality doesn't open. And then, so making plans, but they have to be you probably will need several contingency plans within those plans, looking at kind of creating, roadmaps with lots of different scenarios. And it's tricky because I recognize that a lot of our people listening to this, or who may be, single unit or multi-unit owner operators, maybe don't feel like they have the time to really sit down and go through all of these different scenarios. And they just need to try to generate revenue right now by being in the shop and doing curbside orders. But nonetheless, it's important to work through some of those most likely scenarios at least 30 days out. And then more generally speaking, outside of this crisis, and if you really, are looking ahead, I think it's really prudent to have projections for, growth and hiring at least 1 year out. And if you're planning an expansion in any way, like further than that. But, I recognize that last statement may be irrelevant to so many businesses right now. But I think that, looking at your team, looking at your finances, and looking at what you can and want to offer to your community right now, and thinking about that over the next 2 to 4 weeks is probably the best a lot of us can do right now.
It makes me wonder if by doing that, you're building a habit for creating those types of longer term plans in the future, just by practicing doing that now in the midst of this crisis, that this would potentially create some healthier habits that you can take with you into whatever the new normal is going to be.
Right. I mean, it's unlikely that what we're all learning is, it's not like we're not looking at a date in which everything, quote, turns back to normal. And so, even best case scenario, if we get this virus contained, and people can be vaccinated, or whatever the quote solution is, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to probably happen in the very kind of quick, immediate future. And so I think you're right, Chris, that building in a certain amount of agility and adaptability while still holding on to that intentionality and being thoughtful and clear-headed about what's best, how do we hold on to our values? How do we keep working towards our mission? And again, maybe that mission changes. Maybe that mission changes every couple of weeks in this crisis, but you're holding on to something and working towards something as a team, and it's well thought out.
Yeah, and you're doing so with the intention to, you're caring for not just the business, but you're caring for the people that are with you, helping this business succeed even through this crisis. And so, which brings us to our last thing here, as we've talked about our transparency and communication, the intentional planning that's so critical, and then just the idea of leadership and leading without fear your team in this time. I wonder if you would elaborate a little bit on how you would advise somebody to, really show up as a leader in let that direct how they approach human resources in their shop.
Yeah, so I think that this is a skill that comes naturally to a few, but really it's a practice for most of us. And I think it's, being that person that inspires and can talk to people in a way that is kind of calming or reassuring, so people feel supported and cared for. And what I mean without fear is that I think we tend, as operators or managers, to kind of shy away from really looking at things and talking about things that aren't very tangible or technical, right? It's very easy to tell somebody that their shot is a little off, or that, we're going to pour the water like this, or we grind the coffee this way. It's really easy to give feedback about those kinds of things. It's much more challenging to give feedback about what we'd call soft skills. But when you as a leader can be, first, going back to this idea of like intentionality, like being really clear about like what does success look like in the shop, and really defining those things, and then being brave about giving feedback to team members. Like, hey, the way you talk to that customer, or, so that looks like a hard customer interaction. Can I tell you how I would have done it? Or what was going on for you? Like inquiring, like really connecting with people on a human level, but then being able to give feedback about how a better way to do things. So yeah, thinking about like the way you would give technical feedback, but applying that to, also like the softer skills, because they're so important to the success of your business. And also, your team can feel it when you're like frustrated, disappointed, stressed. Like people feel that, and that's just carrying that and letting that kind of drive your behavior as a leader is not going to yield you the results you need. So, practicing like so many of these softer leadership skills, vulnerability, connection to people, these are things that I mean when I talk about leadership without fear.
And I just want to be clear that you're not saying use these things like vulnerability, etc., but don't confront the issues. Like you're saying confront the issues, because a lot of people will apply those things as a way of maybe hoping that somebody will get the drift when they're like, so what are you experiencing on bar? What are your thoughts and emotions about this thing? And then never really get to the point of saying like, we need you to do X this way on the bar. And so they feel like they've been empathetic, they've been transparent and vulnerable, but nothing has really been accomplished in the end because nobody was actually leading.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you connected those dots, because of course, like it, I think you're absolutely right that it would be very easy to walk away from the conversation you just, like that hypothetical conversation, but one that sounds so familiar, with the two parties involved understanding completely different things, right? So there are like proven methods of how to give feedback, and there's lots of good ones out there, but ultimately, as the leader, what you need to ensure and be really confident about is that the person you just gave the feedback to will tell you exactly what you just tried to tell them. Like that the message is clear on both sides. And again, there's lots of different techniques for executing that. And, each person can find their own best method, but, the way to ensure that is to be like, okay, Chris, what did I just tell you? And, let the employee tell you, like, let the team member tell you, well, I heard you tell me my latte art's really good, but that I was not very nice to that customer. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. That's what I was trying to tell you, but I also wanted to tell you this too. And, it can become like a process in which you learn together. And, ultimately what we have to just keep remembering is that we are human, and the people that work with us and for us are also human. And a lot of us want kind of the same thing, which is respect and dignity, and in a lot of cases to make money, at work, and we can work through those things, these differences together when we're, and especially like we might have these like kind of small moments of somewhat extreme discomfort. Like I'm getting a little nervous just thinking about these hypothetical conversations because they're hard. But once you get through them, it's like, we're okay. We just had a breakthrough, and we're going to be like a little closer as a team now.
That makes a lot of sense to me, thinking about the definition of bravery or courage being the title of a book too, I think. Feel the fear and do it anyway, because you're not going to be free of anxiety or fear or any of those things. They just kind of are always there because it's just work, it's just life. And having these kind of plans and deciding beforehand that this is the way I'll approach it really helps in the moment. But if you just are, again, reactive, you'll kind of weasel out of it, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the same way you wouldn't make compromises or look the other way if you had, like, if one of your vendors brought you the completely wrong delivery, right? It's just wrong. It's just not what we ordered. This is very cut and dry. Like, you place an order and you receive a product, but in some ways, like, it's more nuanced and it's and challenging with human behavior and work performance. But if you kind of think about it in that way and you sort of detach emotionally from it, and I don't mean detach emotionally like a cold-hearted sociopath or something, but just you say, like, here's the way we do it here. And not like not in like an authoritarian way, but it's just like, here are my expectations and here's what I saw you do. And you didn't meet my expectations. And here's how we're going to do it together. What kinds of tools do you need from me to do it differently next time? And those conversations look different between different people and in every different scenario, but ultimately thinking about it, as a business leader, you have clear objectives where you want to go, and there are lots of different ways to get there. But if you see someone way off course, like, you've gotta get them on track.
Yeah, and everything we talked about here has so much to do with creating tools for people to use, especially when you're talking about the vision and the values and communicating that with clarity. Like that, it's not even so much that here's what I want you to do. It's like, here's what we all agreed that we all want to do. So here's, obviously we can both agree that this is not meeting up to, this vision statement or this part of the mission. So that's so critical. One thing, my final question here, and there's so much here that we could talk about, but this has really been helpful. When most small businesses can't afford to hire somebody to be an HR person in their shop, right? And so I guess one question is, how do we go about our formation of an HR strategy as a small business? Hearing all of these things, it could be easy to just scatter it across all the different to-do lists that we have. Like, how do we encapsulate this in a way that the approach to HR itself is this sort of separate thing within the business that we can tap into and say, like, here's my HR strategy as a small business and how we follow through with these things? What would your advice be to us in that vein?
Yeah, I think framing it maybe as your people strategy rather than HR, because HR, even to me, like, I'm an HR professional and I still grapple with what is HR anyways. Like, I still grapple with that. So, but when I say people and I think about the people element of the business, suddenly it's like, oh, like, everywhere people are involved, that's what we want to be thinking about. And so instead of channeling it out into a different bucket, like, and onto a different checklist of here's what we've got to do for our HR strategy, think about it as people. So you've got like maybe your service philosophy and strategy and your financial strategy, and you can see how intertwined those are, right? And then when you start to think about people strategy, like your internal people strategy, and you think about like, okay, how am I going to hire better? How am I going to give feedback in a better way? How am I going to keep my team happy and engaged? And suddenly start to say, oh, like this is very connected to financial strategy as well. So again, not letting it be like an afterthought or a separate thought, but really integrating it and weaving it into like the whole fabric of your business is, I think, essential. And that can be done at any scale. You know, a lot of people talk about making their first HR hire when they reach 50 employees. And sure, that's like a great time for certain businesses to hire a person who's only dedicated to HR. But when, let's say you have a shop with 7 employees, like, yeah, you should still be thinking about your people strategy, because you're going to be doing a lot better financially if you've got team members who are working, you know, who are value aligned and working towards your mission, like as a team for longer than 2 or 3 months at a time. You know, they're staying around and working with you and helping you really build the business. That's going to really impact your financial goals. So yeah, I think as far as then like more kind of tangibly, how do you do it? There is so much incredible information out there for free online. HR is this kind of, some people think it's kind of this mysterious thing that you need to study for a very long time to be proficient at. And absolutely, when we're talking about like law and like the very technical side of HR, absolutely. But, you know, when you're thinking about it from a more like large brushstroke, how to treat people well and hire and retain great employees, like I would suggest, you know, looking at other industries, how like great companies, even like in tech and finance, do it. And obviously a lot of their, like the things they do won't be directly applicable to a cafe with 7 employees, but some of the mindset and just like inspirational ideas will be there for you. And there are some great examples in the, you know, the restaurant industry and coffee industry that you can look to for guidance. But, you know, like people like me who are kind of love this stuff and you know, ultimately just want to see people doing, like running great businesses and treating people really well, are really usually quite available to give just like, you know, quick advisory calls. Like I'm always open to that kind of thing. And I think a lot of my colleagues in HR are as well. So those are just a few ways.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And this whole conversation, again, is very instructive of the moment. And I so appreciate you sharing so openly with us things that are surely going to make our businesses better and the people in our businesses more cared for. Speaking of being able to, you know, reach out to you, you're a consultant. People hire you to talk about these things, and you're very good at it. How do we get in touch with you and talk more about HR?
Yeah, well, you can reach out to me through my LinkedIn page. And my name is Dana, middle name Zemmel Goodwin. Or you can email me, and my email address is dana@danazgoodwin.com. And like I said, I'm, especially during these times, I am very happy to do, you know, quick, no cost advisory style calls for anyone in the industry. Yeah, I'm kind of stuck at home with 2 little kids, and calls like that are always a welcome distraction. So
That's a whole new people strategy you've got going on there.
oh my gosh, it's so true.
Now, again, thank you, Dana. That's really awesome and very generous of you. And we appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for all of the work you're doing for the industry and small business owners. Yeah, I think it's a really, really valuable contribution right now.
All right. So I hope that conversation was helpful for you, gave you some ideas to implement in your store as you seek to maybe rewrite some things in your manual. I would encourage you to take time to develop these into a strategy, an actual strategy that you and your leadership team follow, and make it a part of your culture, make it a cultural institution so that your place can be a people-first organization. And certainly all the things that Dana shared with us are so helpful. I want to mention also, she mentioned this as we ended here, but she is offering to you a free 30-minute HR consultation for business leaders trying to navigate these times. You can reach out to her on LinkedIn or an email. Her email is Dana, D-A-N-A, at danazgoodwin.com. The LinkedIn profile and the email are linked up in the show notes, so you can check that out. So a very generous offer from Dana. I would definitely take her up on that. So thank you so much, Dana. We really appreciate you joining us on the show, giving us these insights, and really helping us build our people programs in our coffee shops. Now, if you want to reach out directly to me, if you have questions, comments, or feedback about the show, I'd love to hear from you. Always love to hear from the audience. How can we improve this show? Or how has this show helped you in your business? Be great to know those things, because we always want to build this to be relevant and useful, actionable, all those good things. And that's also the email to use if you want to work with Keys to the Shop Consulting. If that means going directly to your store and helping you improve your operations, your people, your quality in your store. If you're just starting a coffee shop and you need to start off on the right foot, we just want over-the-phone consultation. All of those things are available at Keys to the Shop Consulting. So reach out, chris@keystotheshop.com. Love to hear from you. And with that, it is the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.